Once upon a crime, in the year 1692, there was a small Puritan village on the edge of a vast wilderness. Its name was Salem Village. It held fewer than 2,000 people. They lived in wooden houses, pressed close together, but each soul felt alone. Winters were long, food was scarce. The people carried the weight of their faith like chains. They feared hunger, they feared illness, but most of all, they feared the devil. In sermons, they heard that Satan could walk among them, hiding in a neighbor or even in a child. In such a place, joy was short, laughter faded quickly, and shadows grew longer than the days. In Salem Village, whispers were as sharp as knives. A neighbor who envied another could turn suspicion into a weapon. And in a world where women had little voice, their names became fragile candles against the storm. This was a society built on strict rules. Reading the Bible was expected. Dancing or games of chance were sins. The smallest act could bring shame, and shame could lead to ruin. It was soil in which fear grew faster than crops. Here, in this cold and watchful town, the story began. A story not of fairy queens or noble knights, but of suspicion, of trials, and of death. A story that would make Salem known across the centuries. The first sparks of fear began in the house of Reverend Samuel Paris. His daughter Betty and his niece Abigail started to fall into strange fits. They screamed, they shook, they claimed invisible hands were pinching them. The village doctor found no illness. He said it was witchcraft. The idea spread like fire on dry straw. Fear loves an easy story. People began to believe that the devil had entered Salem Village. The children pointed to 3 women. One was Tituba, a servant from the Caribbean. Another was Sarah Good, a beggar. The third was Sarah Osborne, a woman who had defied tradition by not attending church. All 3 were outsiders. Outsiders were easy to blame. When Tituba was beaten and questioned, she confessed. She told the people what they expected to hear. She said witches lived among them, and that the devil had a book filled with the names of Salem villagers. Her words fed the storm. The first accusations became a flood. Neighbors began to point at neighbors. Old grudges turned into deadly weapons. By spring, the jail was full. The people of Salem believed they were at war with Satan himself, but the enemy was invisible, and so suspicion became the only proof. The trials began in the spring of 1692. The court was filled with fear. Judges listened not only to facts but also to visions. This was called spectral evidence. If someone claimed they saw the ghost or spirit of another person tormenting them, the court accepted it as truth. It did not matter if the accused was far away at the time. Young girls cried out in the courtroom. They fell to the ground and shook, screaming that invisible hands were hurting them. Their performance was believed. The judges asked the accused to confess. If they refused, they risked the rope. One by one, the accused were brought forward. Some denied the charges, even as the crowd turned against them. Others confessed in order to save their lives, naming more supposed witches in the process. The trials became a chain of fear, each link forged by lies, suspicion, and desperation. In total, more than 200 people were accused. 19 were hanged. One man, Giles Corey, was pressed to death with heavy stones because he would not enter a plea. His final words were simple, "More weight." These words became a legend of defiance against the madness. The executions cast long shadows. The gallows on Gallows Hill became a place of dread. Families watched as loved ones were led away, never to return. The condemned were not burned, as in Europe, but hanged. Yet the image of fire clung to Salem, for the fear felt like a burning that consumed all reason. Neighbors turned cold. Friends became enemies. Even ministers questioned how far the trials had gone. Some said the court was guided not by God, but by hysteria. But still, the hangings continued. Each rope tightened the grip of fear. The people began to wonder who might be next. No one was safe. Even respected members of the church faced accusations. The line between innocence and guilt disappeared into the fog of suspicion. By autumn, the storm began to fade. Doubt grew. Too many lies had been told. The governor finally stepped in, ending the court that had fed the fire. But for those who had lost their lives, the truth had come too late. Fairy tales often close with the villain defeated and peace restored, but Salem's story did not end with peace. The shadow was never caught because the shadow lived inside the people themselves. Their fear had turned neighbor against neighbor, and it had killed the innocent. Generations later, the story was still told. Some spoke of it as a warning, others as a curiosity. The fog of Salem lifted, but the echoes remained. The trials became a symbol of what happens when fear rules a community and justice is lost. In 1957, more than 250 years later, the state of Massachusetts formally apologized. Monuments were built for the victims, yet the name Salem still carries a chill. It reminds us that darkness is not only found in monsters or demons, but also in human hearts. And so the tale lingers, unfinished. It drifts like smoke across the centuries. It ends as it began, with whispers in the mist, and with a warning: when fear becomes law, no one is safe. Once upon a crime.